conflict in 1969, we had literally a collapse within Northern society. We had a fracture that had never happened from 1921. And one of the casualties of that fracture was the criminal justice system. Literally, people within the nationalist community did not buy into or trust or cooperate or engage with the criminal justice system. And of course, then as the conflict broke out and intensified, people still want to feel safe in their homes. People still don't want their homes burglarized or broken into. They don't want their property damaged or stolen. They don't want to be stabbed in the street through a drunken riot. They want to live relatively safe lives. And that's even as the bullets are flying around you within a conflict in which many people felt they couldn't stop or couldn't be part of.
Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast.
Okay. Welcome, Harry. Really nice to have you join us today to talk about the work that you're doing. But can you tell us firstly a little bit about yourself and how you came to be the Director of Community Restorative Justice Ireland?
Well, I suppose it was a journey that was had its roots in the conflict here in the north. And as you'll see in my bio, I'm a former Republican prisoner. And at the time of the negotiations around the Belfast Agreement, one of the aspects of that was prisoner release schemes. And on returning to my community, I had been in prison in the Haste blocks nearly 11 years. On returning to my community, I wanted to play an active role in the peace building. And one of the issues which had long been well up the community agenda was crime, antisocial behaviour, and so forth, had could be dealt with. And said dealt with from a community perspective. And even while in prison, these things would have been debated and discussed. We had a number of people, substantial number of people who would have been reading criminology and the other sort of educational programs and projects. We were huge contributors to the Open University. So while we were in prison, we were spending our time productively. And I had heard about this debate that was ongoing within Republican circles, but also within academic circles. People who had a long history in human rights issues, people who had extensive careers in youth work and working with young people, particularly young people who were on the edge of many of the activities that were happening in our community. And I very quickly sort of tapped into that type of debate and that type of discussion. And really it was about, I suppose, at the sharper end of it, during the course of the conflict, in 1969, we had literally a collapse within Northern society. We had a fracture that had never happened from 1921. And one of the casualties of that fracture was the criminal justice system. Literally, people within the nationalist community did not buy into or trust or cooperate or engage with the criminal justice system. And of course, then as the conflict broke out and intensified, people still want to feel safe in their homes. People still don't want their homes burglarized or broken into. They don't want their property damaged or stolen. They don't want to be stabbed in the street through a drunken riot. They want to live relatively safe lives. And that's even as the bullets are flying around you within a conflict in which many people felt they couldn't stop or couldn't be part of. And it's noticeable even if you look at conflict areas throughout the world. I was reading there a number of years back on Syria, where the Syrian authorities were still trying to prosecute drug dealers. They were still making drug raids in Damascus. So these things are important to people, and as the conflict deepened and broadened, the IRA in particular, but other armed groups, but the IRA in particular within the Republican nationalist communities, tried to fill that gap. And they filled the gap with a number of different techniques. One being discussion, trying to make interventions based on dialogue, trying to find, taking problem-solving approaches. And the other side of that continuum was quite violent responses to crime. And when I say violent, I mean literally people were executed for drug dealing. People were shot in the legs and in the knees in particular, or shot in the ankles, knees, and elbows, or were beaten or expelled from the community and from the country, or a mixture of some of those things. So it was a very sort of brutal response to what were, issues that were happening in every other major city, in every other place across Europe and across the world. And that discussion about how do you change what's happening? Because if you're in a peace process, the guns are falling silent. You're now talking to what would have been your political enemies. You're reaching across to across community responses. Then how does that add up to shooting people in your own community and the continuation of that? So I felt that work for me was earthy. It was a ground level, and it was worthwhile, because while I had been away and we have been reading and educating, we do understand that the drivers and the underpinning factors and dynamics of much crime and antisocial behaviour is poverty. It is the place where you live, and all those sort of push-pull factors that are happening around you. And to make an impact on that was one, a substantial effort in terms of building peace. Two, it was going to challenge the mindset that these problems could be dealt with in such a violent way. And I suppose three, opening up new ways of thinking about very old problems. The problems of antisocial behaviour didn't just land with us in this past 2 or 3 or 4 years. They've been with us forever and a day. And then, of course, the issues around crime, theft, and taking things that just don't belong to you, and using and abusing, again, have been with us for millennia. So we also then opened up that debate. As I say, I was part of that while I was in prison. And the debate took us to everything we were talking about in the debate, it pointed towards restorative justice. That's where the lines kept coming in.
Can I just ask you a question? And it probably sounds like a bit of a stupid question, but did the punishment, beatings and the kneecappings and so on, did it work? Did it cut down drug dealing?
It absolutely did. It absolutely did. There was a different level of drug dealing in the communities that I live in today. There's a different level, and much of it, I suppose, can be traced to maybe the lack of that or the lack of that type of response. But in reality, drugs was always here. It's how it showed itself. And of course, living in I suppose Belfast would be a bit of a backwater in some respects. While Dublin was undergoing huge issues around the introduction of heroin into the drug scene in the late 70s, early 80s. That didn't happen in Belfast, and it didn't happen for different reasons. But the conflict was most certainly part of that. But up the road in Ballymena, there was also a huge heroin issue, which was connected more to Scotland and people who were working back and forward and being introduced to this type of substance, bringing it back. And with heroin users very often become suppliers too, and vice versa, and it takes root. So yes, I would say that there would be a sense that the armed groups from whatever section of the community who were pushing against drugs were having a certain level of success. And I also remember, I think it was in 2007, we had started to engage with the police instructors. And the policing plan had just been drawn up and announced for West Belfast. And West Belfast would be one of the biggest Republican blocks right across the north. And there wasn't a mention of drugs in the policing plan. And I spoke to a senior officer in West Belfast and asked him about it. And he says, we don't encounter drugs as an issue. Which really, should have been ringing alarm bells for the police. Because really what you're saying is that we don't encounter the community. We aren't engaged into what is happening within a particular community here. And that begs questions of policing and what policing is about. And we're probably going to explore some of those ideas and what that means, and how do we turn these things around. Because the problems that I can talk about in Belfast, apart from the conflict, are happening right across the Western world. There's no place unique here. There's no place who are experiencing different issues. Maybe there's some pushback in terms of how you deal with them, bringing in new ideas, trying new and more innovative ways. But the actual issues are the same. So if you go to Berlin, you go to Paris, you go to Copenhagen, Amsterdam, a lot of people use it as a place to use drugs. It's there. So
Harry, you've touched. I mean, you're talking about the fact that these are very common issues, but you also made reference to Syria, for instance, in this. And we've previously interviewed Gerard Drennan, who comes from South Africa, who we spoke with him about the topic of restorative justice, and also Bas Dreisinger, who's visited various countries across the world, but including Rwanda, for instance, and had some discussions with her about restorative justice. Do you think there is something about societies that have been marked by really very deep levels of violence and conflict that means that they have to resort to they have to be more innovative in trying to find solutions?
I think absolutely. I think when you're dealing in a changed situation, you need to adapt to that, and you need to look for different type responses. For instance, when we were starting out in this journey, it was pre-1988. Negotiations hadn't been concluded around the Belfast Agreement, but people were starting to talk about it because it was rooted within the conflict, and they started to say, look, the basic was broken here. What are we doing as a community? What are we doing as Republican activists? What are we doing as political figures? What are we doing as community figures supporting this? We need to take a different view, and that was all part of that debate. The other, I suppose, fairly substantial dynamic was because of the conflict, and I'm not sure how familiar you will be with the politics of the Belfast Agreement, but the issue around criminal justice, and particularly policing, was so toxic in 1988 that it had to be parked. So it was put into a commission in which Chris Patton headed, and they then delivered a report after 2 years, and that journey then started. How do people start to engage around policing, and so on and so forth. There was a number of series of negotiations, which took people up to the point where, I suppose, full engagement around policing started to happen. But for Republicans, and I'm speaking here as a restorative practitioner, but going back to being released from prison, to make the jump from saying to our own communities, look, folks, antisocial behaviour, crime and criminality are not going to be shot away. I have to say there was huge agreement around that statement. So, from saying it's not going to be shot away, then what do you say? How it is going to be impacted upon? What do you do? How do you bring people on a journey with you to say, here's what we're going to try and do, here's what we're going to try and achieve? And the obvious, I suppose, in a normal society is you say, well, then we'll embrace the criminal justice system, we will move towards that statutory world. We didn't have the luxury. The Irish government, the British government, the Americans, all the different political parties, north, south, east, west, all had different views on what policing should be. They couldn't come to an agreement on what it was. And then, of course, we talk about the criminal justice system. Many people talk about the police. The police were a major combatant within the conflict. There was what we call, or what we term, and I suppose very loosely, kind of legacy issues, places, shootings that the police had been involved in, which were disputed, or a relationship between police and Nationalist armed groups, in which the suspicion was that the police were supplying information, intelligence, weapons, and maybe some logistics and around some of the killings that had taken place, particularly in the 80s and early 90s. And how do you make the jump to say, folks, we're going to engage with the police now? This is 1998, and we'll forget about all that's going. You wouldn't have got off the ground. You wouldn't have got out of the room, probably, literally. But so being challenged with those sets of circumstances, you have to start to think of what we would call a third way. And the third way then became the restorative justice approach. A bit like you had talked about Rwanda. Dr. Chairing Interaction is a member of our board who done substantial work in Rwanda. And again, the Rwandans were fixed or were faced with a situation that, the system had failed. The system has failed, but there was the enormity of what had taken place, I think, really sort of opened up the potential for restorative justice to become part of the resolution of what had happened during the genocidal years.
What was the key turning point for you, Harry, do you think, to shift the mindset of trying to resolve things yourselves and thinking we need to have discourse and this restorative justice process?
Well, I suppose there's a number of things. There was I think the reality that Republican armed groups, and particularly the IRA, had never really given much thought to being a police force. That hadn't been a part of the discussion. That hadn't been a part of its development. It kind of happened on an ad hoc basis. And then over the years, you kind of seen the failures of that, or the accesses of that, and you knew that something needed to happen in around that type of activity. I remember Martin Manis, I think it was in 1983 or 84, I think maybe 1984, announced at the Easter period, Easter commemoration in Belfast, and then the punishment violence. Now that didn't last particularly long because there was nothing to replace it with. But the fact that he made that announcement tells you that the public was saying this needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to stop. It needs to go away. It needs to be whatever. But something else needs to happen. And that was then part of the thought process. And then coming out of prison and being part of those discussions while in prison, you were thinking more deeply about these matters, and you were also talking about, well, this is part of building peace. When you hear people talking about, you know, taking the gun out of Irish politics, well, this is it at ground level. This is it at our own community. This within our own communities. This is what it's about. So there was a number of different aspects that came together to form a more rounded view to say, listen, this would be a worthwhile project. This would be worthwhile work. This is something we would want to be involved with.
And is the Community Restorative Justice Ireland, is it made up of both Catholic and Protestant staff, volunteers?
Well, we in terms of our staff, we would employ people from both traditions, but we tend to work within Republican communities, nationalist community. Excuse me, and although we have done work across the community divide, we would have an organisation that's based in Nationalist communities called NIA, Northern Ireland Alternatives, and we have worked very closely with those people for many years, in which we have done some work which they can do their bit at their end, and we can do our bit at our end, and work together and jointly work on things.
And can you give us some idea of the sort of scope and size of the work that you know, how many people do you work with? What kind of work are you doing?
I suppose over a year, it literally adds up to thousands. I think we would deal with about 1,200, 1,300 cases per year. And if you average a case of 4 to 6 people, you know, it's a substantial number of people. In terms of the sharp end work, and we're still engaged with that. We were evaluated by a guy called Harry Mega, who was part of the setting up of these projects. Harry Mega is an American academic. He's also a restorative practitioner. He done a lot of around training with both organisations that are here, and he evaluated us from 1998 until 2006, and we had 350 interventions around young people, not solely young people, but mostly young people, who were moving towards the stage where they were going to be beaten, assaulted, punished, shot, expelled from their own communities. Something awful was going to happen to them. And we had 350 positive interventions. That's a huge piece of work.
Mm.
So you know, it's substantial, and even back then, when we were a much smaller organisation in many different respects, I would say there would have been at least another 50 cases that weren't in the evaluation because they were outside of the geographical areas that were there to be examined. So it's been a huge piece of work.
Sounds like
and that type of work is ongoing. Even as I speak, like I was actually involved in a case a number of weeks back in which a young person felt under threat, and we made an intervention which has been successful.
Thank you.
So you mentioned earlier on, Harry, how it was clear that just working with the police wouldn't get off the ground, as you put it. But do have any contact with the police service of Northern Ireland these days?
Yeah, absolutely. It's substantial now. We have met every chief constable from QORD right through. We work with the police on a daily basis on issue-based work, and we will meet with the police in terms of development and how do we develop relationships, how do we develop better relationships, how do we develop working relationships. All of that is part of the mix. So we meet with police at every level and right across the board. Any of our workers, any of our offices will have visits and significant contact with the police. That wasn't always the case, but it is now, because we knew, any society. I would like to sit here as an abolitionist and say, let's do away with jails here, let's do away with criminal justice systems, let's we can sort this all out. That's not the real world. That's not the world we're living in, unfortunately. We do need a criminal justice system. We do need prisons. We do need people to be kept safe. But what take is more the point now. How should it work? How should it serve the community and its citizens? Those are, I suppose, the more normal type questions that we're starting to get into, rather than the political conflict and what happened and what took place during that.
Thank you. So you've been describing a large bulk of activity, of work that you do. Is this just in Belfast, or have you got branches across the north?
No. Excuse me. No, there's offices in Derry and in Newry and South Armagh. And we have reached out to other communities across the north to do specific pieces of work where we can, because like everything else, there's resources where you're constrained on what you can actually do and what you can deliver. But in terms of the north, Belfast and Derry are the two big conurbations, and Newry and South Armagh. It's significant because it's a border region, and it's also a region where, in terms of conflict, it was fairly high intensity. So it's a good spread of work that we're doing, and then over this past number of years, we've also expanded into North Lurgan as an area. So and we think there should be more of this stuff. In terms of a strategic approach to restorative practice or restorative justice, we think there's certain areas or there's certain centres in society that actually lend themselves to this type of work and these types of approaches. And we think there needs to be much more cognizance given of that, and that if you're looking to really develop this, you should be looking towards young people, early years projects. You should be looking towards schools. If you're looking towards sporting organisations, things that can really rule us out in a positive way. I think sometimes restorative justice and restorative practice can get locked into the criminal justice debate, when really it's about so much more. I remember doing a case, and I mediated the case, and we had invited a justice of the peace to the mediation, and he sat in and he said after he was blown away by the experience. And he says, look, 90% of the issues dealt with around this table don't belong in a court, will never be raised in a court, will never have the opportunity of being heard in a court. So he's actually blown away by the experience. Because while there's maybe, there's a law broke somewhere, there's someone who's offended, so much other damage that is done. And of course, the starting point is damage to human relationships. So we feel, and we feel quite strongly, that as we, I suppose, are maybe entering into a different era now, because for many years people haggled and became involved in a debate which is really politicized, rather than being a debate about, does this work? How can we implement it? How can we develop it? It was about, Harry Maguire's an ex-prisoner. We don't want these sort of people involved, which is all, it was all really a bit of a nonsense in a whole lot of different ways. It should have been, well, Harry Maguire's doing positive work there, so let's see what's happening. Let's judge it by its merits rather than something else. And that kind of way sort of shackled the debate around this. But I think as we have worked away, as we have opened ourselves up, and we've been very open to that for many years, this stuff works. I have seen people who have really tried to harm each other badly, like sit around the table and talk it out, and end up shaking hands, sharing tears, while one of them, felt threatened, and the other maybe felt victimized. After 10 or 15 minutes discussion, they were all feeling all three of those things, everybody. Many people act out of fear or out of anger or out of just hopelessness. And so, having the opportunity to air your feelings, having an opportunity to be involved in a resolution that you can be part of, that's how it works. It's very simple stuff. It's very, people talk about restorative justice, and then they go into, it's a system which is universal. It's happening all over the world. It's and you get caught up in the language of that. You need to strip that down. See restorative justice. It's happening in every place right around the world because it's happening across the dinner table. It's the couple who's having relationship problems talking them out and saying how do I want to resolve this? And sometimes you can't manage to do it yourself or yourselves, so you bring in somebody else. Someone else comes in and gives you a hand. It could be the priest, it could be the doctor, it could be, people are doing this stuff. It's the parent who sits the kids down and says, "Look what happened there," and has the conversation, and they're back playing in the garden and everything's resolved. These things are happening from we've walked the planet. The North American Indians, the peace pipe, the circles. These people were doing it before we even had heard about it. I would like to say Larry's had been doing it for centuries and for millennia. We had the Bretton laws, and the Bretton laws are about reparation. It's about holding the clan together. It's about holding the community together. So people have been doing these things, and say we strip away the science and we strip away the sort of the mistake of it. It's really how do people have difficult conversations around difficult issues.
You say simple, Harry, but it doesn't sound that simple to me. I suspect it's simple because you and your organisation have been doing it for quite a while now, so you've become very good at it. I mean, I watched the documentary by Stacey Dooley, which was on your organisation's website, and it looked very difficult to me and quite tense. Difficult work. How do you train and support your staff?
Well, sometimes good and sometimes not so good. But I suppose in terms of training, we're all trained up to a recognised level. Excuse me. We have the we work through a government protocol now. Have done for many years. And as part of the protocol, it was that we would be trained to a recognised level in terms of restorative practice and restorative justice, which was delivered by the university at one stage. We are now delivering some of those programs ourselves. But we would have had basic training in what we were doing, and we were training in human rights, restorative justice techniques, mediation, child protection, supporting victims. So we had a good level of training initially. We were, I suppose, pioneers in terms of what we were doing, and like all pioneers, we were pushing the boat out. And sometimes we had left the paddle on the wrong side of the river, and we were literally up the creek with the paddle. But that's how you learn. That's how you learn to develop techniques and develop ways of dealing and talking to people, of listening to people, of engaging with people. And in the early days, many of the critics of what we were doing would have been saying, like, how do you do this? Like, people just come in and they want to talk. And we were saying, yeah, that's how it happens. No, that's not how it happens. They're being threatened to talk. Now, see, once you strip that back, that's just so much nonsense. That's like threatening the alcoholic, saying, we're going to hit you if you don't come in and talk to your parents about the alcohol abuse here. It's just that's completely waste of time. I don't know anybody who would want to be involved in anything like that. But what we did do, and what people very quickly understood, was, when we engaged with them, it didn't feel threatened. Because we were saying, we're here to make sure people don't get threatened. We're here to help resolve, but we can't do it on ourselves. We can't do it by ourselves. We need the participants to the dispute to say, right, I'm prepared to take my responsibilities also seriously, and I'm prepared to play a role within that. And that's how you start to move things along. And as you're engaging with people are saying that about it, and they're feeling more secure about it. They're feeling more listened to, and very often we are presented with what we call the presented issue. It's someone stole my car, such and such stole my car, such and such broke my window, such and such done whatever. But if you take the car one, because car crime is a huge issue, particularly in West Belfast, you have people being hurt and injured on a weekly basis through that type of car crime, and many young people caught up in it. And if you really strip that back and you start to think about, you're sitting talking to a parent here about their child who's 14 or 15 years of age, who's out in the middle of the night driving a stolen vehicle through an estate at 80 and 100 miles an hour. It's not just a stolen car as a problem, folks. There's other issues. And you start to tease those other issues out, and you start to talk about those other things. And then you start to bring in supports, and you start to bring in resources who can be useful at helping people move through what is the presenting issue, but also one of the residual issues. You can't put out a fire by saying you're just going to work in one corner of it. That's not reality, and we understood that, and because we actually live in these communities, which is a great plus, because what the people you're meeting with, we actually feel these things. We have kids, we have families who live and are trying to do the right things in these communities, so we understand it, and then how you bring these techniques and how you use them. It's actually, I would say, it is very difficult work. It can be very draining work. I remember on one day doing 2 mediations, and I said I would never ever do it again. I was physically completely washed out at the end of it. But I also have to say, being in a mediation and seeing the changes taking place right in front of you, it's a very, very privileged place to be. Because you see people who are genuinely saying, listen, we've got Houston, we've got a problem, but we're not asking Houston to fix it. We're going to fix it ourselves. And that's big stuff. And that's when you're in the really sort of creating change. someone coming in and saying, you've got a problem, here's what your problem is, and you better solve it. It doesn't, that's not working for us. And if we look around, Western Europe, we can see it, but it's not working. So why are we trying to say it is working? Let's have a more open and honest debate about it.
So, Harry, before we get to the end, is there anything you think we ought to talk about? Anything you want to raise that we haven't raised already?
Well, I suppose there would probably be a number of things. One would be the disconnect between the criminal justice system and the citizens that system is supposed to serve. There is something inherently wrong, and this isn't it's not a political issue per se, but we can see the political impacts of it. When we look at the Black Lives Matter campaign in the States, there's something wrong there. I'm not making a judgment of what is wrong, but there's something wrong. There's something wrong in Western Europe when we see on our TV screens huge demonstrations against social issues, whatever it may be. Last week it was the retirement age in Paris, and we see citizens and the police really, really go for it. And then you say this happens in Berlin, happens in Rome, happens in London, happens in Dublin. And we need to ask ourselves some serious questions about that. And we need to ask, is the criminal justice system about the state, or is the criminal justice system about the people? And for me, it needs to be centered much more about people and what it can actually deliver for the citizen. That has to be, the police officer is one of the few people we invest the power to hurt and harm a fellow citizen. And in my view, that's not being used particularly well right across the globe. So that would be one area. The whole issue of criminal justice having the answers, because it's nearly you're told that they do have all the answers, when in reality they don't. And it's nearly like a pretense goes on, and I think people are getting fed up with that pretense. So we need a bit more honesty about, well, what can the system do, and what should the system be doing, and starting refocusing and reset the system. I suppose thirdly, for the sort of work that we do, we need to be open to it. We need to start and debate it much more. We need to take our blindfolds off. This isn't, you see, it's not a political thing. Getting two neighbours around a table in the middle of Anderson time to help them have a difficult conversation about whatever has led to the breakdown in the relationships. That's not a political thing. And let's see it as that. The police don't have to be involved in every little incident. Because let's be honest, if they were, they couldn't deal with it anyway. See, that's the honest response. So, let's look at these things. Let's give these things fair weather. Let's look at them from a point of view that, because you raise some of these issues at certain forums, and the first people nearly to criticise are the people in the system, because it's maybe a threat there. So is it about control, or is it about people-centric processes? In my view, it should be about people-centric processes, bringing people back into the workings of the system, exposing the workings of the system, letting them be a part of it, letting them be a part of the solutions. Because at the end of the day, go back to the alcoholic, I've mentioned that a few times. It's only when the person with addiction says, I need to change. I was a smoker for many, many years. It's only when I decided I was giving them up. And that's when the change happened. Everybody else telling me you need to stop smoking, it's never done its job. So it's a wee bit like that, and that's how these debates, and kick these issues around. The issue of drugs, which is a huge issue right across Western Europe and further afield, we need to bring some honesty to that particular debate and discussion, and we need to be open to managing it in different ways, because there's still people who believe that there's a war on drugs and that it can be won. And that's just not, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that's in the real world.
It's very difficult to get a discussion on these issues, and it sounds as if you're the one setting an example for Stormont and the House of Commons in London rather than the other way around.
Well, to be honest with you, I think, the people on the ground, we don't have the luxury to say, look, we're going to put that on hold. If two neighbours want to hurt and harm each other, and let's be honest, we've had neighbour disputes in which someone who's been stabbed to death, it can go that far, it can go that deep. Why would you want to get in there and put the fire out and have people put the fire out? It's simple stuff.
Okay.
So Harry, it sounds like the work that you're doing sounds like it's quite emotionally challenging and draining at times. How do you look after your own emotional self and make sure that you're nourished?
Well, I just come off the back of a heart attack, so I mightn't be the best person to ask. No, I'm just being glib about that. But look, it is difficult having switch off points, because when I talked earlier about being a part of the community and living in the community, and you live and breathe every bit of it, the same as everybody else. It means you're accessible. It means your door can do that. It means people will come to you. But that's part of the process, I think, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. Having more resources would be one way of doing it. Being strategic about growing these types of responses, put them in the schools, put them into the kindergartens, put them into the creches, teaching young people these techniques right from the get-go. Folks, people will end up sorting it themselves. I say, if you're walking past a primary school and you see a bit of a dispute, you always see some young kid get over and say, hold on, getting in the middle. You always see that. Yeah. People can do this stuff themselves. We don't need systems. We don't need big whoever looking after us. We just need to be, I suppose, empowered. And we're not empower people with these thought processes, these ways of dealing with conflict. We teach kids the basics of nowhere else. Why not give them these?
Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Harry. Great to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.